Hey everybody, so this is going to be the third of the Grasshopper assignment demos. And in this case, we're going to be making a skyscraper, just like this guy, which looks intimidating at first, but is actually really one of the more simple things that we're going to create. So what you're going to need is you're going to need to draw out some kind of shape. It can be orthogonal, it can be curvilinear like this. It doesn't actually matter too much. Just come up with something, keep it somewhat reasonable in size. So, you are making a skyscraper, so it probably shouldn't be a couple inches, but in this case, maybe something that's like 50 feet by 50 feet or thereabouts. Doesn't really matter too much. We could even do, if we wanted to, could do a pentagon. We could do a hexagon. I might do one of those. We can actually do all of these shapes and just kind of trade them in and out and see which one we like best. So I'm going to do another one. This time we'll do a hexagon. See which one. And again, the sort of beauty of Grasshopper is we have the flexibility to try all of these. Let's try let's do a 8-sided star. All right. Several different tower options going on here. So I'm just going to delete the tower I've already made so we can make a new one. So I already have the script, but we're going to put it aside so that we can create it again, fresh this time. So you can see my canvas here is getting a little bit busy, but I keep rebuilding the same thing over and over again for these demos. So you should have 3 sort of panels of, 4 different little panel areas of different definitions, whereas I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. A few more at this point. I'm going to move some more out of the way so I can make some space. So first thing I want to do, as usual, is I need to load in my curve. So I'm just going to type in CRV to get a curve. Right click on it, set one. I think I will start with, I'll start with the same curve I did last time. So this sort of organic looking shape here. So what we want to do is we want to first create the floors. So we're going to move this guy up in the Z direction, which is the upward direction. And let's just put in a slider for, say, 15. Now, that's only going to move it once. So we moved up 1 floor in this case. We're going to want to move up multiple floors in the same action. I could just repeat this and do it over and over again, but that would be crazy. So I'm going to type in the word series. What that's going to allow me to do is create a series of numbers in a row. So the first number is going to start by default as 0, so I'm just going to leave that. We want to set the stepping. So the stepping is actually going to be that 15. And then we want to set the count. So the count is going to be the total number of floors. So right now, so actually we're working in inches. So 15 would only make it 15 inches high, whereas we're going to want to be working. So for this one, you may just want to move it so it looks a little bit more rational. It may not exactly be. So 100 inches is still going to be fairly small given the actual scale, but it's okay. I'd prefer not to have you guys switching scales all the time, and since you're all going to be doing everything in one model, if this isn't super accurate, just make the next height up look reasonable, whatever that is. We're not going to be too concerned about it being only 60 inches, so 5 feet tall. But now I'm going to take the series, which if I'm going to type in panel so we can see what's happening here. And essentially, we have 0, 60, 120, 180, 240, et cetera, et cetera. It's counting by 60s. So now if I put that into the move command, you can see I get a whole bunch of floors. As I increase this, the spacing changes. As I increase this, the count of them changes. So a basic little series manipulation. So move in this case, you could also think of as sort of a copy command. There isn't really so much of a copy command in Grasshopper because everything is inherently copying, because each time you do something, you're creating something new. It's not taking the same thing, it's just creating something new. So we could actually, by right-clicking, rename things. So we could call that floors, and we could call that heights. And again, I just right-clicked and then type in the very top box, and that will allow you to rename things, which is really useful especially when it comes to sliders that you may be adjusting later on in a complicated script. Or it'd be very easy to get lost as to what you're actually adjusting. So, I mean, we can make this skyscraper go as tall as we want, crazy tall, as many floors as we want. Right now, all these floors are the same exact profile, just being lifted. So we actually also want to do a rotation. So what we need to do is do a rotation command. And in this case, I'm going to use what's called rotate axes. So it's going to ask for my geometry. And then it's going to ask for an angle, and it's going to ask for an axis. It looks like it's using some kind of default line as an axis. Actually, we're not going to use this. Yep, I'm going to go ahead and delete that. There are so many rotate commands. I'm just going to use the standard rotate, not rotate axes, just rotate. And then that's going to be rotated. So I could probably get the other one to work, but it wasn't really what I was intending to do. So you can see here, it is asking for an angle, and it's asking for the reference plane. So by default, it's going to use the regular reference plane. The angle is also going to by default be in radians. If I right click, I should be able to set this to degrees, which I personally understand much easier than I understand radians. So if I type in, say, 360, I can rotate them all. But what you're going to notice here is, one, they're rotating about the central point of the model, which again, although might make an interesting skyscraper, isn't exactly what we're going for. So we need to set the reference point, which in this case is looking for a plane. However, the center of something will also work. So I'm going to type in the command area, which area will also give us a center. So if I take that, plug the center in there. So it's now giving me 38 values and 38 values of both non-grafted flattened data. So as I rotate, you can see they're going to rotate about the center of that object. However, I want each row or each level here to rotate a different degree than the one before it, so that they smoothly rotate up. The way we're going to do this is we're going to use the same series data, because this has 38 points. I'm going to do something that I did in the previous one, which is I'm going to remap this data. So I'm going to type in remap. I'm going to need three things again, which are remap bounds, which will be this guy. And again, this is all the same stuff that I did in the last tutorial. And now I'm going to need to create a domain, which will just be construct domain. So those things, again, were remap, remap, and then I need bounds, and then I need construct domain, and just the regular construct domain, not the construct domain 2. I'm going to plug the bounds into the S, I'm going to plug the domain into the T, and of course, nothing is going to happen just yet. What we want to remap is going to be the series data. So I'm just going to take this. So essentially, this data is now heights of how high things are off the ground. So the higher it is, the higher that value is going to be. Now I'm going to set some sliders. So I'm going to put in, let's do sliders starting with 5, so it'll be 0 to 10. And by default, I'm just going to set them to be 1. So the bounds is just going to take that same series data. And now this, I'm going to multiply by that angle. And I'll plug that in. So what that allows us to do is essentially the top value is going to rotate whatever degrees I set it to. So I can get a crazy amount of rotation if I want. And the bottom value will rotate none at all. So once I get to a form that I'm starting to like, I'm just going to leave it there. Now, I set the domain to be higher, so I could, if I wanted to, flip these so that the bottom rotates and the top doesn't, which really doesn't make very much sense, so we're not going to do that. If I make the domain higher, it's just going to basically multiply whatever the value I put in here. So that really doesn't make sense anymore either. So we really want to have a domain from 0 to 1. And then we get to control the rotation. So if we want to do a full 360, we can also double click here and we can type in, set it to be 360. So it begins and ends in the same place, essentially. It makes for a very crazy looking tower. Okay, so now we need to build some of the components of this tower. The first thing is we need to, let's build some columns. So the columns, I'm just going to align to the grid right now. So I'm just going to do a simple divide command, divide curve, take these geometries, put them in there, and let's make a slider. I just typed in 15 so I can get one that goes from 0 to 100. And now I'm going to do a polyline. So I just did several things in a row, but I'll explain them in one moment. And so what we have here is we rotated the data. Well, the last thing we did was to rotate that data. We then divided it into a series of points. However, these points are coming out as grafted data. And we need to actually inverse this, because if we see what happens, essentially we're connecting all the points on each level, which isn't really super useful for us because those columns really aren't columns. They're just running around horizontally. So we need to do the flip matrix command, and we'll take this, plug it in here, and plug that in there. And now all of a sudden we see we have these smooth lines moving up and down. And in this case, those are going to be our columns. They look a little ridiculous, but this tower is a little ridiculous. And now I'm going to do a pipe command to make them into an object. Now pipe is going to be a little bit longer, a little slower, especially as I start to make more and more complex curves with more and more points. 6.2 seconds. So that is a bit intense. But we can set the radius. So if I wanted these columns to be or whatever distance, let's just put in, I don't know, 4. Let's see what it looks like. Again, it's going to take 6 seconds to calculate as soon as I do this. So we'll just have to wait and wait and wait and wait. And, oh, I needed to click it. So there they are. Okay, those look good enough for me right now. Again, this column or this tower doesn't really have a scale, so we're just going to leave that. I'm actually going to go ahead and turn this guy off because I know it's slow, and I don't want it to slow down my definition as I work through this. So that was the first thing. Next, we need to make some floor plates. So I'm going to do a offset curve command, and the reason being is I'm going to take these, and my columns are already aligned to these outside edges, so I actually want my floor plates to go a little bit larger. So if I plug this in here, I can set a distance. So let's do, again, a slider. And you can see here that it's actually making that smaller. So offset seems to be by default making our curve smaller. So we might need to do is go in the negative direction, which I could set my slider to be negative, or I could just type in negative and create a little negative node. So now, as this thing gets bigger, yes, there we go. So now my little curves are getting bigger. So now I'm actually going to decrease the number of, just to speed things up, decrease the number of floors down to a reasonable 16. And I might decrease my rotation too, so it's not quite so crazy. Okay, so that looks better. Much more easy to manage. So now I can do an extrude curve, which will need a direction. So I need to type in the axis. This will be the z-axis. And then we need to set the thickness of the floor plates. So I'm just going to go ahead and do 2. And I'm going to type in cap. So essentially now I have floor plates that are, well, in this case 2 inches because that's my model units right now, but maybe I'll make them a bit bigger. They're also shooting upwards, which I may want them to go down, so I'm also going to do the same type in negative. I'm going to right click here and set the max value to be 100. I think I want some more flexibility in how thick my floors get. So now they're going to be moving downwards or expanding downwards the bigger they get. There you go. So I could make them, let's see, if I make them 34, they should connect together because that's how far apart each level is. So now they're all stacked. That could be an option, but I was actually just going for the floor plates, and this is kind of a different sort of tower that you could go for. It's not really what I intended for, but it's kind of interesting looking. So instead, I'm just going to set this down to the 4. How about that? Okay, those look reasonable for the scale of this construction that I have here. So if we were to see these together, we can see we have the lines, and now we have the floors. Starting to look reasonable. And now I'm going to do another offset command. So I'm actually just going to take this first offset and copy and paste it so I can create another one. You notice if you copy and paste several things at once, it will keep all the wires attached together. But in this case, I actually want to reverse this. So I want my lines to be smaller this time. So you can see here, as I make them smaller, they go inwards. And the reason being, I'm now going to do a loft command because I want to create the glass. So in this particular scenario, which I will need to flatten this, so we get this sort of smooth shape. So we could, again, sort of in a studying phase, maybe study the form just by doing this. So if we continue rotating, which again, it's going to be a little slow, but we can see what's happening. Can give us an idea of what our final form will look like. But essentially, we have the columns on the outside, then we have the glass on the inside, and we have the floor plates being a little bit bigger then. And that's going to be about it. So, you know, we could go to a much taller column. We could go to a much taller tower. So instead of 16, let's try 24 stories. So there we go. And we could again adjust that rotation. So it goes for crazy rotation. Again, similar to what we did in the last assignment, we could add in a graph mapper and set this to, how about a sine wave? Nope, not that one. The sine, there we go. And now plug this in and see what happens. Now, we may not have enough floors to really make a sine wave worthwhile. You can see here it gets really crazy. I think the structure of this is probably just not going to be very logical at this point. Too many rotations, looking a little too much. It certainly is an interesting structure, but definitely probably not super buildable right now. Pretty crazy looking. So we might want to do, maybe in this case, a lesser rotation if we're going to do a sine wave manipulation. So you can see here it starts to curve in, and then like a sideways, curves back out and ends up back where it started. So that could be a cool little skyscraper, not too unrealistic. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is I'm going to type in brep. So brep is, in this case, just a blank param or param. I don't know how to pronounce that one exactly. That's a holder that can hold anything. So brep is just a broad category that just holds practically everything. So I'm going to take my loft, which is going to be my glass. Now I could export these individually, but just to keep it simple, I'm just going to export them all the same. So I'm going to enable my pipe, and of course the pipe command is a slower one, so it's going to take a second to calculate, 3.8 seconds to be precise. Load that in here and load that in here. So if I click on this, I have all these components in one place. Again, I could still adjust things, but it is going to be a little slow, so I'm not going to. And I'm just going to bake this. And it will now appear as an object in Rhino. Now, since I didn't bake with grouping turned on, you can see everything is separate. I'm just going to hit Control Z. And if I now were to bake that with group, yes, please. This time, you can see my object is one easily selectable group. I can turn off isocurves and I get this crazy looking tower thing going on. So again, let's try this same thing out with another shape. So we'll put this one in, set curve, so that my input is now switching to this 8-sided star. And yep, there we go, 8-sided star. Of course, it's a little bit different in size, so you can see the offsets are going a little crazy. Let's try one more. Set curve. And see what that one looks like. Okay, that one looks fairly logical. So it seems actually in this case, it's reversed the direction of each of one of my offsets. So, and that's just, again, the sort of weirdness of curves because they have directionality. So this curve that I initially drew wanted everything to be reversed, which is why when I did these offsets, they needed to be like this. But so if yours isn't going the same direction, you think negative isn't helping you, then try the regular offset. And probably need negative up here. So see, these are some of the things that no matter how well closely you follow this, you could end up having a slightly different outcome. So that looks better. So now if I did, now this will only do one curve at a time. We'd have to set it up differently if we wanted to do multiple curves. Because that would be dealing with graphed data and we have to manage that differently. It's definitely very possible. Well, that is weird looking. I don't think I like that one. I think I feel very threatened by that tower. It's frightening. But yeah, essentially, if we wanted to do multiple curves at a time, we certainly could, but we'd have to set it up differently to manage that graphed data. And I just hit Control Z a couple times to see if I could go back to the first one. Not quite there. So anyways, once you have a tower that you are happy with, of course, get a nice shot of it lined up. So in this case, I'm actually going to bake these things on separate layers. So I'm going to bake this on my, say, layer 1, bake this on my layer 2, and bake my capped geometry on my layer 3. The reason being is now I get this nice multicolored tower. And now I can move it aside. Of course, I forgot to label anything. So if I move this, unfortunately, it's going to move the Grasshopper script too because I'm trying to not select that curve. See if I can unselect it. There it is. Okay, so now if I move this, you can see the Grasshopper stays in place. So now line this up. Zoom out to get your definition. And take a screenshot of this, and you're done with the second part of the assignment. All right. Yeah, of course, play around. If you want to use a sine curve here, go for it. If you want to do something else, go for it. The goal is really just you should have these three components: a glass layer, a floors layer, column layer, and there should be this sort of general rotation. Whether it's going back and forth like the sine or not, that's up to you. But look at that column. That is a crazy column. All right. And the next one will be posted soon.